Some call it a chilling coincidence. Others call it divine intervention. In the middle of the 20th century, a single television broadcast bridged the gap between ancient Rome, a Hollywood studio, and the walled fortress of the Kremlin. Has anyone ever told you the story of what now looks like prophecy? On that winter day in 1953, Fulton Sheen stood in front of his television cameras and read the funeral oration from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Only he didn't say Caesar. He substituted the name Stalin. And then he substituted the names of the men closest to Stalin in the Politburo: Beria, Malenkov, Vyshinsky. He read the lines, "He must die." A few days later, Joseph Stalin had a stroke. Within a week, he was dead. Sheen never claimed it was prophecy, but the country noticed, because for 20 years, this Catholic bishop had been telling Americans that he understood communism better than the State Department did, and he kept being right. This is the third episode in the Sheen Files, and today we're going to talk about the fight that consumed most of his public life. Not Hollywood, not television, but his decades-long warning about communism. And, more importantly, what he said would come after it. Because his real warning wasn't about Russia. It was about us. Sheen had studied communism the way St. Thomas Aquinas studied his opponents, at the source, with the seriousness that the truth deserved. He read Marx. He read Lenin. He read the Soviet philosophers most American journalists couldn't name. And what he came to was something almost no one in his time was saying. He said communism was not primarily an economic system. It was not primarily a political program. Communism was a heresy. It was a Christian idea that had broken loose from Christ. The idea that history is moving toward a final reconciliation, that the poor will be lifted up, that injustice will be undone. And now those Christian convictions were being marched through the world without the God who alone makes them coherent. And that's why, Sheen said, communism was so dangerous. It wasn't appealing because it was new. It was appealing because it was a stolen version of something true. It promised what the gospel had already promised. But it promised it without humility, without grace, without the cross. It said the new heaven and the new earth could be built by force. Now here's where Sheen went somewhere most of his contemporaries refused to go. He said the real reason the West was vulnerable to communism was not that communism was strong. It was that the West had become weak. We had become a civilization that no longer believed in its own foundations. We had inherited Christian liberty, Christian dignity, Christian respect for the human person. And we had quietly stopped believing in the God who made any of it intelligible. He said it like this: the Russian people have not lost their religious instinct. The communists have. But the people have not. And the day will come when Russia turns back. The deeper question, Sheen said, is whether the West will still know who it is when that happens. Whether we will still have a soul to offer the world once communism is gone. And what we did not understand, he said, was that the death of communism was not going to be the death of unbelief. It was going to be a different unbelief. Softer, wealthier, more polite. A civilization that had no Marx and no Lenin, but also had no God. A civilization where you don't have to fight the church because the church no longer means anything to you. That, Sheen said, would be the truly dangerous moment. Because communism, for all its horror, at least took the question of God seriously enough to hate him. The new unbelief would not even bother. It would simply forget him. It would build a comfortable life around shopping, entertainment, distraction, and self-management. And it would call that freedom. And anyone listening today understands what he was describing. We are not living through a Marxist revolution in the West. We are living through a quieter loss. A civilization that still uses Christian words like dignity and rights and equality, but no longer believes in the God who grounds them. We are running on borrowed Christian capital, and every generation the account gets a little smaller. Sheen's answer was never primarily political. It was sacramental. He said you cannot answer a spiritual crisis with a better political party. You answer it with prayer, with the sacraments, with personal holiness, and with telling the truth about what a human person is. The most powerful thing any of us can do for our civilization, he said, is to actually be Catholic, to live the faith we have publicly inherited and quietly forgotten. There is a great line of his that gets to it. He said, "We are at the end of Christendom, not at the end of Christianity, not at the end of the church, but at the end of Christendom." Meaning, the easy, cultural, automatic version of Christian society is over. From now on, being Catholic in the West is going to require conviction again. It will require choice. It will require what it required of the early church. Sheen was not afraid of that. He thought it was a gift. Because a faith that has to be chosen is a faith that gets purified. And a church that has lost its cultural privileges is a church that has to rediscover its mission. Communism was the warning shot. The deeper test is what we do now.
This is the Catholic Frequency.